Well, I'm glad you're here this morning, kicking off a brand new series called Pretty Ugly. Now, I know that's a potentially offensive statement, so I'm going to jump right in and make us laugh a little bit. We're going to play a game. Everybody likes a good game, and so we're going to play a game. And this game is very simple. I have found a few images online that are incredibly zoomed in. If you are a scientist, it's like 1,000 times zoom. You know what I mean. Here we go. Here's number one. What is this? Does anybody know what this is? Now, the game is very simple. You just guess what it is. And I'm going to give you this one for free. That is the seeds of a orange pepper. Now, you're like, okay, I kind of see what we're doing now. Okay, now you've got a feel for it. It's zoomed way in. All right, here's number two. Anybody know what this is? Doesn't have to be food. It's not hair. It's a good guess. It is the pages of a book. All right, so now that you can kind of picture what's going on, all right, this one I had no idea when I saw it. I'm like, I got nothing on this one. It's close to honey, very close, not honeycomb. It's actually frosted flakes from Kellogg's, a cluster of delicious. Now, I'm going to give you a little secret, by the way. That cereal gets soggy quickly. If you want the solution to that, you need 2 bowls. One for your cereal, scoop. One for your milk, dunk, eat. You can thank me later, game changer, for that soggy cereal. I'm just telling you, that's psychos do that. That's fine. I'll be a psycho. Okay, here's number 4. Close to wood. A skunk? Stump. Okay. You stir your coffee with them. Who would have thought that it looks like a mountain range, right? Like, who would have? I never would have guessed that. All right, here you go. This one is interesting. You use this to preserve a beverage. A cork. That is a cork zoomed into 1,000 times. Yeah, you're like, I have no idea what this stuff looks like. All right, Brett, you should get this one. This is the head of a guitar, right? The tuning keys of a guitar. When you look at it, you're like, I don't know what that is. A zipper? I don't know. All right. A couple more. No, say what you said before, though. Honeycomb, yes. Yeah, it's crazy when things are zoomed way in, you have no idea. Kind of 2 more. This one, I got nothing. You're like, mucus? What is this one? What even is this? This is actually a lime zoomed 1,000 times in. It's like translucent a little bit. It's really weird when you see these things really quickly and really far zoomed in. A couple more. Here we go. This one, I had no idea when I saw this one. I had to cheat. What'd you say? Fire. Well done. That was my son, and I didn't even give him the answers. All right. Last one. If anybody gets this, it's impressive. It's not a chip. It's not a lemon. Pasta. Which to my son said, my little 7-year-old said, Dad, what do you call a fake noodle? An impostinator. And I laughed at it. I chuckled at it. And so the whole purpose of the game, the whole purpose of this series is that sometimes when we're too close to something, we can't really see what's happening. And so the purpose of this 4-week series, all the way through February, is for us to self-assess, us to step back and get perspective on ourselves. It's to step back and get perspective on who is in our life and who has a say in our life, and should they have a say in our life? Should they have a voice in our life? It'll be about allowing God to assess us and ask you, who are you and how are you and what's good and what's not good and what's right within you and what's wrong within you? How are you on the inside and how are you on the outside? Because many of us want to look good on the outside, but some of us are really ugly on the inside. And the whole purpose of this series is for us to self-assess. Let me be pretty inside first. They tell me I have a face for radio. I'm okay with that. I don't need to be, you'll get that later, some of you. I don't need to be pretty on the outside. I want to be pretty on the inside. And so how do we do that? So what I want to do is I want to start with a question. Anybody ever heard of curb appeal? If you've bought a house or you've sold a house, they say curb appeal is the thing that matters most right now. I've got a friend that's a realtor in Denver. The market is insane out there. He's selling homes that should be about $200,000. He's selling them for $1.5 million. Sight unseen, No appraisals. They're just penning it at the desk. No inspections off of curb appeal. He said, Dan, the market, you'd be shocked at the market right now out here. It's wild. People look online, see the pictures of what it looks like, and put their offer in $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 above fair market value. Because the supply is so low, the demand is so high. And so what research is telling us right now is curb appeal matters more than it ever has. But I want to tell you something as a Christian, curb appeal doesn't matter as much as the structural integrity, the structural support of your house. Where is your foundation? Who is your foundation on? Because I can look at this house online and I can make an offer, but unless I go into the house, I can't tell, is there mold in the basement? Is there structural damage? Has it had water or flood damage? What's the radon level like? Is it built on an ancient, Native American burial ground? The ghosts of Christmas past are going to come and haunt me every day, which is only happening in M. Night Shyamalan and Stephen King movies. I get that. But you don't know unless you get access to it. You don't really know what's inside the house. In fact, I was reading this week about curb appeal, reading about tips and tricks for buying a house because I was studying this. And one article said this: it's important to drive by the house. It's important to drive by the house at 10:30 on a Friday night. Not just to know what's happening at the house, what's happening beside the house. What's happening down the street from the house. What's happening across the street and in the backyard of the house. It's important to have curb appeal, but it's more important to know what's all around and allowing yourself permission this month to step back and gain perspective. How are you really doing? See, in the Christian life, many of us have curb appeal. In the church world, many of us have curb appeal. But if we were to allow people into our home, would they see a different side of us? Is what you present on the outside matching what's on the inside? And so the purpose of this series is to help us navigate not just curb appeal, but inner beauty. How do we deal with ugly people? And I don't mean physically ugly. How do we deal with ugly people when tensions come and conflicts come? How do we deal with them without becoming ugly ourselves? And if we're all bent to sin, that means that we all are ugly inside. How do we not let that come out? William Shakespeare, I'm not much of an old English kind of guy, the thous and the these and the thines, doesn't really tickle my fancy, but he said something years ago. All that glitters is not gold. Smash Mouth came along in 1999 and they made a song and said, all that glitters is gold. So what is it? Is it all that glitters is not gold, or is all that glitters actually gold? Curb appeal, inside and outside. Are you pretty ugly, or are you pretty? I can't answer that for you. Those closest to you could answer, but you have to answer it yourself, inside. And just as much as home buying is a process, so is Christianity. So is following Jesus. And it's not the outside that matters most. It's the guts of the house, the foundation being shored up. So years ago, my parents, my brother and I moved out. We went off to college, and they went and bought a house that they knew they were going to retire in. My mom still lives there. And so when they did the inspection, they had their realtor's inspector go through, but then they called my uncle, who was a home builder. And my uncle drove up from the Toronto area. He built high-end custom homes, and he drove up and spent about 5 or 6 hours with my mom and dad walking through every room of the house, every light switch, took a screwdriver, pulled off the panel, made sure the switch was still good, the wires were connected properly, went to the basement, lifted every drop ceiling panel, and checked the integrity, the structure of the building. Took hours and hours and hours. And my Uncle Ernie said to my parents, he said, this house is incredibly well built. And so while there's probably some cosmetic things you're going to want to do, like the flooring, you probably can replace the flooring, and you're going to want to touch up the siding on the outside, and the house is just built like a rock. Listen, we all can maybe stand to lose a few pounds, right? We can touch up the outside a little bit. Who cares? How's your structure? How's the integrity of your heart today? Only you can assess that. I can't assess that for you. That's between you and God. But I believe it's less important to have curb appeal, and it's more important to have structural integrity. Who or what is your foundation built on? In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus gives us a foundation. And I'm going to read a few verses, and then I'm going to have a couple on the screen. But I want to read the first little bit of Matthew chapter 7. So you can just listen along. You don't have to open your Bibles if you don't want to. I'll go slow enough that you're catching it. Jesus is deep in the throes of the Sermon on the Mount. Actually, if you want to know how to live a good life, just read Matthew 5, 6, and 7. The Sermon on the Mount. I could just read that, close my Bible, and say amen, and you'll be blessed because it's Jesus talking. But this is what he says towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount. He's winding it down. He says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged. The measure you use will be used to measure you." That's sobering. Just those two verses alone, very sobering. "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and yet pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Hey, let me help take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your face, out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove that little speck from your brother's eye. And don't give to the dogs what's sacred. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they'll trample them under their feet, and then they will turn and tear you to pieces." This is all in the Sermon on the Mount. "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened. For anyone who asks receives." If you paused right now and asked God to reveal something inside of you that's keeping you from really being connected to him, if you ask him, you will receive that knowledge. What you do with that is up to you. If you're waiting for the supernatural to happen, if you're waiting for the super, you have to do the natural. Self-assess. Ask and you will find. Seek. Knock, and the door will be open to you. If you ask, you receive. If you seek, you find. If you knock, we've talked about the last 2 weeks, the door will be open. Which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? All we have to do is ask. And because he's a good, gracious, kind, loving Father, he will give. I love that. And so in everything, Jesus says, do to others what you would have them do to you. This sums up the law and the prophets. And so enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. What road are you on this morning? Man, there's so much in here. There's 10 messages right here. What road are you on? Only you can answer that. On the outside, we might look like you're on the right road, but you know inside you're not. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ferocious wolves, and by their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree can't bear good fruit, or a good tree can't bear bad fruit, and a bad tree can't bear good fruit. In fact, the bad tree will be thrown into the fire. This is all the same message that Jesus is giving. He winds it down. He's ending the message. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? And didn't we drive out demons in your name? And didn't we do miracles in your name? And didn't we go to church every Sunday? And didn't we tithe faithfully? And didn't we serve in the nursery? And didn't we sing on the worship team? And then I will tell them plainly, unless you do the will of my Father who's in heaven, and really lay your foundation on me, I never knew you. This is deep stuff. In fact, I grew up Wesleyan, right? I'm a recovering Wesleyan sometimes in my theology. Because when the altar was open, we had to go. When the preacher called, man, you had to go because I don't want to go to hell. And yet it's very clearly, there's been times I'm like, I wonder if I'm going to hear those words. Man, I don't want to hear those words. Away from me, I never knew you. So therefore, he finishes up. This is how he wraps up the Sermon on the Mount. His whole summation of his message. Therefore, everyone who hears the words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. It's a good place to build. The rains came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, the trials came, the stresses, the worries, the fears, the anxiety, the burden, it all came at you. And it beat against you. And yet you did not fall because you had your foundation on the rock. That inner structure. The inner beauty. But everyone who hears the words of mine and doesn't put them into practice is like a foolish man who built that same house, but put it on sand, and the rain came, the winds came, the struggles came, the fear came, the anxiety came, the burdens came, the successes came. And the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, and in these 26 verses, says nothing about curb appeal. He says nothing about looking good on the outside. This has everything to do with the inside, the foundation. Where have you put your anchor? Where have you put your trust, your hope, your faith, your security? He talked about a couple things. He talked about the plank, and he talked about the speck. And so I have a couple planks here. Now, if I jab this in your eye, ow, right? Even if I took just a little piece, and you can't probably even really see this little piece right here, but this tiny piece, if I put that in my eye, ow. Anybody wear contacts? It's the worst if something gets behind that. You're scratching it, and then you got to take it out. You got to rinse it off. You got to find a mirror. You got to do this. Has anybody ever put a contact in with their mouth closed? I dare you to try it. You can't. You can't do it. And you're going to try it tomorrow morning when you get up, and you'll be like, the dude was right. Not about a lot, but he was right about that. See, the reality is, the littlest speck in our eye can cause irritation. It can cause us to get distracted. And Jesus is telling the followers, the people learning about him, and he's telling us, stop worrying about that little bit in their eye when you have a honking plank in yours. You see, Christians become so consumed with the speck in the brother's eye that we forget that we've got planks in ours, and everybody can see them. And that's why it's important today. I want us to self-assess. I want us to step back and go, hang on, what am I really consuming? What am I really allowing to control me? Don't worry about them today. You're like, oh man, I wish so-and-so was here to hear this. Don't worry about them today. This is you. I'm not going to worry about somebody that I think, oh man, I hope they hear this message. No, Dan, I want you to hear this message today, Dan. To step back and self-assess. Are there any specks in my eye causing me irritation? I got to stop worrying about this right now and worrying about you. I got to figure out what's going on within me first. He says, don't judge or you'll be judged the same way that you judge others. The measure you use, it will be measured to you. He's not talking about the outside physical appearance. He's not talking about body shape, body size, body style. He's talking about the heart, the guts, and ask the questions, why do you look at what's in them? You hypocrite, first take care of yourself. Worry about you first. So we become so preoccupied, so concerned with their speck that we miss the massive piece of wood that holds us back. Basically, what he's saying is get yourself shored up before you try to help somebody else. Anybody ever flown, been in an airplane before? Anybody ever paid attention to what the flight attendant says? There's actually some important information in there when they're talking. Most people put their headphones in, they're doing something. If I was going to say reading a magazine, that would date me, so they're doing this. But they give you a couple tidbits of valuable information. They say, first and foremost, in case of water landing, your seat cushion can be used as a life preserver. Time out. How do I disassemble the seat to get the cushion? Because if it's just pop right off, it's going to be back there somewhere in the ocean because we just crashed. So it's got to be secured a little bit. Are there instructions that they give you? No, but then that's how my mind thinks. So if you're on a plane with me, just know when she's given that spiel, I'm like, I wonder, how do I get this disassembled? That's how my mind works. I digress. Here's the real purpose of this illustration. They then say this, in the case of cabin pressure loss, oxygen masks will fall from the overhead compartment. And then they give us the most valuable information with the next sentence. Place yours on yourself first before helping your neighbor, your wife, your husband, your partner, your son, your daughter. Before you help anybody else, help yourself. Why? Because if you don't secure yours first and you're trying to help them and you run out of oxygen, you're dead, they're dead. You're both dead. And in the Christian life, we are so consumed with this in them that we miss this in us. And until we shore ourselves up first, we're both dead. Don't worry about the speck in their eye. Let them and Jesus figure that out on their own. Let them and Jesus shore that up. You shore up yourself first. We have a lot of people trying to help others that haven't helped themselves first. I want to tell you something. Curb appeal doesn't matter as much as we think it should. Looking good. Culture wants us to spend billions of dollars to look good. But it doesn't matter. You want to know how I know that? Because I know what Jesus looked like. This is what we think Jesus looked like. How you doing? Right? He's got the chiseled face, he's got the beard, he's got the sash, always the sash. Was he like CYC? Was he a Boy Scout? Why was he wearing a sash all the time? I want to know that. He's like, all right, help Mrs. Schuleman across the rocky stony path. Badge. Navigate 40 days in the wilderness. I can do that. Badge. Turn the other cheek. Avoid revenge. Badge. Ooh, die on a cross for all humanity. Nobody else is getting that badge. And I just wonder, why is he always wearing a sash? And again, I digress. This is just how my mind works. You want to know how I know that this isn't what Jesus looked like? Because he grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of a dry ground. He had no beauty. He had no majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should even desire him. He was despised, rejected, a man of suffering, a man familiar with pain. You know who he wasn't? This guy. Love me some Ryan Reynolds. In fact, let me fix my socks here for a second. Yep. For those in the cheap seats back there, that's Ryan Reynolds on my socks, because My daughter loves me and knows that I love Ryan Reynolds. See, he wins sexiest man and sexiest dad, and he always wins. And can you blame him? He's a good-looking Canadian. He is. He is a Canadian. But I'm just going to tell you something. Jesus had something that nobody else was offering. He was not good-looking. He wasn't what we pictured him to look like. He had no majesty. He was born in a barn. A rat-infested, poop-filled barn. No royalty. No red carpet. Nothing in his appearance that we should even desire him. And yet, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people followed him everywhere he went. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people still have laid down their life and followed his life, laid down their way and followed his way. Because he still offers something that nobody else will ever offer. Who or what is your foundation on this morning? Just take a second and self-assess. Look deep within. Don't assess what you look like on the outside. It's Valentine's month. You're going to be eating chocolate. Don't worry about what you look on the outside. Self-assess. What do you look like on the inside? What's interesting is, by all accounts, Jennifer Aniston continues to win world's most beautiful woman. I'm just going to tell you, this is the most beautiful woman. In fact, all that Mother Teresa did glittered, right? Everything she touched. See, outer beauty doesn't matter. Inner beauty does. Are you pretty or ugly on the inside? Only you can answer that question. Take stock. Take stock of what really matters. I'm going to close, wind down with a quick illustration, and then we're going to have a time of reflection together at the end in a second. When Kim and I when we bought our house a few years ago, we bought a house in Michigan, and we were doing our walkthrough, and we had been told, look in the attic, look in the basement, check the wiring. You do all the things that you're supposed to do. So we're taking stock, we're taking notes, we're writing everything down. We're like, we like this house. We put our offer in, that offer was accepted and signed on the dotted line, and then realized we didn't do one thing that we should have done when we were inspecting and walking through the house. In fact, for about 4 or 5 years, however long we owned the house, I cursed myself every time it rained and every time it snowed, because when we went to park our cars in the garage after we had signed on the dotted line, the cars did not fit in the garage. The builders had shorted the garage 8 to 10 feet. They did this in about 10 houses in our subdivision. They did this, find out later, hindsight's always 20/20. They did this across the Midwest when they were building these homes because it saved them millions of dollars. So every time it snowed, I'm like, curse you, Alan Edwin, home. They get to drive in their garage, and I got to plow. Every time it rained, I'm like, curse you, Alan Edwin, home. And I was like, all along, I should have been like, curse you, Dan, for not doing your due diligence. I will never buy another house without saying, hey, back that car out. I got to make sure mine fits first. I ain't signing on no dotted line without checking. Because all the time, the garage was there. It just wasn't right. See, all the time, some of us we look good, but it's just not right. How's your heart? How's your foundation? We can look good on the outside, but we can be really ugly on the inside. The garage that was built and intended to protect us from the elements was shorted. Curb appeal. Loved that house. Hated that garage. It's better to have inner beauty, a faith in Jesus that's on a firm foundation. So I want to ask you just a couple questions as we kind of close down. As you self-assess and you step back and you really begin to ponder, who am I? What am I? How are things? Are things good? Are things bad? Are things right? Are things wrong? Here are some questions you can ask yourself to assess within. When stress comes your way, who do you run to? Or what do you run to? How do you handle money? Are you in debt constantly? Are you saving up before you purchase? How well do you submit to authority? These are things we have to assess, and only you can do it. And so we're going to talk about that these next few weeks. Today was simply about laying a foundation for us. Because I'm just going to tell you, you can't give what you don't have. If Kim and I were in a rocky spot in our marriage, which we're not, praise Jesus, you know who I'm not going to marriage advice? Someone who's been divorced 6 times. I'm just not. Your track record doesn't bode confidence for me. You can't give me what you don't have. If we're trying to invest money into a 401k or a stock market, you know who I'm not going to ask advice from? Someone who's broke. Declared bankruptcy 74 times. Ain't got no money. Because you can't give me advice if you've not won it. And you're like, Dan, that's really harsh. No, that's smart. We have run to the wrong people for advice for far too long. I remember before we had kids, I was going to be the best parent ever. I was a youth pastor for 3 years before we had kids. We had 100 and 150 students in our youth ministry. And I remember judging parents going, oh, my kids will never do that. How can you and then you have kids, you're like, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not dying on that little molehill. That's not a mountain I'm going to die on. I remember one time I judged a parent that gave their kid a cell phone at dinner. I'm like, we're never doing that, babe. We are never doing that. Now we're like, just take the phone and be quiet, please. Just for 5 minutes, just bzz, so we can talk. Thank you. There's zero more. Like, if you don't have kids, it's not the best to offer parenting advice because you can't give what you don't have. And so if somebody comes to you for spiritual advice, I want to make sure our church doesn't have a bunch of these people walking around in it. I just don't. If I come to you for advice, I want to make sure you're shored up, that your foundation is good so you can help me. If you come to me for advice, I don't want this blocking. I want to be able to help you. I want to be shored up. This isn't us one person better than the other. This is collectively as a church being the best Christian people we can be. And so next week what we're going to do is we're going to talk about who is in your life. Who gets a say? We're going to talk a little bit about boundaries next week. And if you don't show back up, I might judge you a little bit. Next week will be really important. Who gets a say in your life and why do they? And should they? Should they have a place in your life? Jesus was very clear about boundaries. We're going to talk about that next week. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to close. And I'm going to close in a minute with a song. And you're going to find yourself in one of these 3 camps. Camp 1, Camp 2, or Camp 3. Camp 1. Your foundation is solid. Your foundation is shored up. Your foundation is good. And so when I lead us in a closing response, just a quiet song of reflection together, I'm going to ask that Camp 1, if you find yourself in that camp, I'm going to ask you to stand out of a way to say, thank you, God. I am so grateful that my foundation is in you. That I have faced storms and battles and stresses and pressures, and I have put my house on the rock. And I just want to thank you for that, God. That's you. You're Camp 1. Camp 2. You thought your house was on the rock, but something came along recently, and you're like, I don't know if I'm as shored up, as firm as I thought I was. This has rattled me. And I don't want to stay on this sinking, shifting, feeling sand. I want to get back to a rock or on a rock for the first time. So Camp 1, I'm there. I'm all in. I love Jesus. You're my God. You're my guy. I love you. Thank you. You're going to stand. Camp 2. Thought I was. I want to be. Jesus, help me. You're going to stand. Camp 3. You don't know where you're at. And you're not going to stand just to stand because everybody else stands. I thought Jesus was in my corner, but man, I've been praying for this and he has not come through. So Camp 1's going to stand. Camp 2's going to stand. Camp 3, you're not going to stand. And now I know what you're thinking, but Dan, if people look at me, they're going to know. Don't judge others, or you will be judged. The same measure that you judge others is how God will judge you. So if you see someone still sitting, you don't get to judge them. You don't know what's going on in their life. But what I don't want us to do is all stand because everybody else is. No, if you're wrestling it down on your faith journey between you and God, and you're like, I don't know if I really believe in you. You have bailed on me. I thought for sure I'd be out the other side of this storm by now. I don't know. Please don't stand. Self-assess. Take stock of what really matters. So Camp 1, you're going to stand. Camp 2, you're going to stand. Camp 3, you're going to stay seated. And we're going to sing a song together, just closing, just a quiet, reflective song. One camp's going to thank, one camp's going to go, I need to be back on that. And one camp's just going to say, I don't know where I'm at. But I want to be honest with you, Jesus. I'm not just going to stand to fake it so I'm pretty on the outside. I'm going to stay seated so I become shored up and pretty on the inside.